Every week in the New York Times, there are articles profiling usually couples, occasionally single individuals who are in the housing market. And the articles are about what their budget is and where they're looking. And then it says, which one would you choose? So this morning I'm thinking, which neighborhood would Jesus choose? He's the Son of God. He could live anywhere, right? You know, what neighborhood, what schools, what amenities in the neighborhood would he choose? Would he choose to live in a gated community? Would he choose to live on this side of the tracks or that side of the tracks? And I ask this question with a bit of tongue-in-cheek because he is continually, and this morning once again in this gospel passage, choosing to hang out on the wrong side of the tracks. He's choosing as the Son of God to hang out with sketchy people. People who, respectable people, would give a wide berth from and be uncomfortable around. In this case, the description of this man who was possessed, the scriptural narrative says he was possessed by demons. Let's translate that to our own contemporary language. He was mentally ill. He was not in his right mind. He was scary. Maybe he spoke to himself. He was naked. He lived in a cemetery. Spooky. And it says Jesus came to that country. And it doesn't say why he came there. Maybe we could get some context if we read a little bit before about where he was and then he was on his journey. But he came to this new place. And maybe there was more attractive and more enjoyable places to go and see in that town. Certainly, his reputation by this point in his story would have preceded him, and there might have been some people of the distinguished citizenry who might have wanted to invite him over for a meal and honor him. But this crazy guy comes up to him as he gets out of the boat and starts accosting him. Now, you and I have all spent time in which we have had encounters with individuals who were a little intimidating. And more often than not, the reaction is to just kind of give a wide berth and to get on our way and to go to the place where we are going and not get entangled, right? Because you never know what might happen if you stop and engage with somebody who's a little sketchy. And Jesus does that. And he starts talking with this guy. And before he can even ask him a question, the guy is already calling out about him. And this is a critical insight in the scriptural narrative, because on what we might refer to as a spiritual level, spirits recognize spirit. And so he is saying to him, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus?" And interestingly, the fear goes both ways. Not necessarily Jesus's, but most people's fear. In this case, the fear was of Jesus and what he was bringing to that encounter. And Jesus asks him, "What's your name?" That's a good starting place, right? You meet somebody new. "What's your name?" "Oh, my name's Garrett." "Oh, it's nice to meet you." "What's your name?" And the man who is mentally ill says, "Legion." The information that's being provided is there's multiple personality disorder here. You are not dealing with a singular identity. You are dealing with many identities. And so they have this little encounter, and a little piece of Jewish humor in this, and it's always good to recognize the humor in scriptures, is that there's a herd of swine on the hillside. Now, I've always wanted to know, who was the Jewish pig farmer? It just doesn't seem to add up. But nevertheless, there's this herd of swine there, and so there's this casting out of the demons, and it goes in the swine, and the swine run off the cliff kind of like lemmings. And so this could be a triumphant healing. Jesus counterculturally, counter-emotionally hangs out in the risky situation with the person who's not marginalized from normal society. He's way beyond the bounds of acceptable social behavior, and brings to him something that is redemptive. That's the neighborhood that Jesus hangs out in. He hangs out in the neighborhood in which there is an opportunity for the presence of God to bring something redemptive. And sometimes in the swankier neighborhoods, even though there are opportunities for God to be redemptive, the residents and the inhabitants of those places would act and pretend like all is in order and nothing is in need of any kind of healing. But Jesus goes directly to the place where the evidence is beyond clear, and he brings healing. And the irony of this gospel passage is the reaction of the residents of that place. And so let's think this through for a second. Before Jesus' encounter, there had been a very, very understood order of segregation. The right-minded people were over here, and they were doing their right-minded things, and everything was ordered properly and civilly. And then the crazy guy was over here, kept at a distance, not in my backyard. And everybody understood their place. You keep your distance, we'll be over here, we won't have any problems. And what Jesus did is, he violated the line. He was someone in his right mind, possessed not of demons, but possessed of the capacity of God to bring blessing into his encounters. And he went into the bad neighborhood. So one possible reaction, one that maybe might make it a nicer end of the story, is if the residents from that place who had formerly been intimidated, it said, what, he was kept in chains? He was so scary and dangerous. If they had come and they had thrown a party, and they celebrated because this man who had had such affliction in his life was suddenly healed, and they rejoiced, and there was an opportunity for a coming together and a recognition of a common humanity. But that's not what happened. What happened is, it says when they came to see, and they found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, they were afraid. And not only were they afraid, all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them. Why would you do that? Why would you say to the guy who had brought blessing and healing, you're not welcome here? Unless you preferred the order of the way that the things were before healing broke through. You preferred to where there was the bad neighborhood over here and the good neighborhood over here, and there was the street that everybody knows not to cross, and it was stable and ordered that way. And if Jesus stayed around, he might have disrupted more things. He might have hung out with more riffraff. He might have crossed more boundaries that made people uncomfortable. And so instead of risk that possibility of him bringing redemption into their circumstances that were segregated, they asked him to leave. And we know this is not only a Bible story. We know this is not only the gospel of a couple of thousand years ago, but we know that sometimes that same kind of preference for the order between the this group and the that group can live in us. And that's not an out-and-out condemnation. That's just an acknowledgement of human nature and our comfort zones and our inclination to congregate with people who are like us. And that's natural, and it's familiar, and it's comfortable. And yet the gospel passage here says, what would happen? What might happen if there was an opportunity for redemption and the bringing together of people who don't ordinarily hang out with each other, and by the power of God have the opportunity to have new relationship? What would happen? What are the possibilities? And that's what Jesus brings into this situation. I'm not currently a homeowner, but I have been in the past. And I have gone through those questions. What neighborhood do I want to buy into? What are the schools like in that neighborhood? And what are the amenities of the neighborhood? And who are the neighbors? And all of those things that are natural questions that we ask. And what's the potential for the property value to increase in that neighborhood? And all of those things. And there's one additional question that I think is an important one to raise, that Jesus raises in this gospel passage. And that question is, who will I have the opportunity to be in relationship with in this neighborhood? And are there any other neighborhoods that I should be going to hang out in order to meet people beloved of God, just the same as I am, so that I can experience the fullness and the richness of all of humanity? And that was the gift that Jesus brought into the world. That was the example of the healing of the man with multiple personality disorder, mental illness, out of his mind, is that there are no barriers that human beings can erect with one another that God can't break down in order to bring us into relationships in which we can carry out Jesus's foundational commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. And so our opportunity from this gospel passage today is to consider what neighborhoods we can be blessed in, both by the people who live there and also by the blessings that God has given us to be a vessel to let flow through us into the lives of others. And to consider the possibilities of neighborhoods that we might not ordinarily spend time in, but that we can follow in Jesus' footsteps to go in, because there is the potential for reconciliation, for redemption, and for blessing with our neighbors in those places. You and I have been blessed abundantly and recklessly by God. And a part of our good stewardship of God's blessings is to open ourselves to let those blessings flow through to others, no matter who they may be and where they may live and what they may look like, so that the beautiful panoply of all of the breadth of humanity may be honored through us in the fellowship of God. Amen.